A day where one mistake, one moment of poor judgment, spirals out of control. Out of control. What if that one mistake didn't just cost you your job, but cost you your home, your name, and got you exiled to the other side of the planet? To a place you weren't even sure was real. For over 160,000 souls, that wasn't a hypothetical question. It was the grim, terrifying reality that laid the foundations of our nation. Their story isn't one of grand kings or glorious battles, but of ordinary people, battlers, forced to endure the impossible. It's a yarn about profound loss, but also about a resilience so deep it became the very bedrock of the Australian spirit. This is the story of how a country was built, not with flags and fanfare, but with chains and broken hearts. And peers, and broken heart, our story starts not under the brilliant southern sun, but in the damp, grey misery of late 18th century England. Let's meet a young bloke we'll call Thomas. He wasn't a hardened criminal from the slums of London. He was a farmhand from Devon, knew the seasons and the soil like the back of his own hand. But these were hard times. The American colonies, where Britain used to send its unwanted, had slammed the doors shut. The jails were overflowing, and the villages were full of good people, struggling to get by. One bitter winter, with his family's bellies aching with hunger, Thomas made a choice. He stole a side of bacon from a wealthy merchant's stores. It wasn't a cunning plan. It was a desperate, clumsy act, and he was caught before he'd even made it to the end of the laneway. In the courtroom, it was like he was a ghost. The judge, perched high up in his wig and robes, didn't see a starving lad. He saw a threat to order, a crack in the foundations of property and society. The sentence was read out, the words echoing in the cold, formal air. Transportation beyond the seas for the term of 7 years. 7 years. It was a life sentence. Thomas had never been more than a day's walk from his own village. Now he was being sent to the end of the earth. Being sent to the end of the earth. You have to wonder what went through his mind in that moment. Did he even comprehend it? This place, New South Wales, was just a whisper, a phantom land on the far side of the world. But before the terrifying ocean, there was the river. The river. Thomas was rowed out onto the Thames and delivered to his new home, a prison hull. These were old, rotting warships, their fighting days over, now serving as floating dungeons. The stench hit you from 100 yards off, a thick, gagging mix of bilge water, disease, and unwashed human misery. He was herded below deck into a darkness packed with hundreds of other men. Petty thieves, Irish rebels, hardened criminals, and boys no older than himself. His name was stripped away. He was just a number. Days bled into a featureless grey. The only light came from small barred grates. The only sound, the constant clinking of chains and the coughing of sick men. Perhaps that was the moment, right there, that could have changed everything for him. He could have just given up, let the despair and the filth consume him, as so many did. So many did. But somewhere in that darkness, a different kind of spark took hold. A stubborn refusal to be broken. He learned the rules of this new world. He learned who to trust and who to avoid. He shared his meager rations with a younger lad, a terrified boy from Scotland, named Lachlan. A terrified boy from Scotland named Lachlan. They didn't speak of home. It was too painful. They spoke of the future, this impossible place they were being sent to, clinging to the idea that anything, even an unknown hell, had to be better than this floating coffin. Then, the day arrived. They were marched from the hulk, blinking in the unfamiliar sun, their legs unsteady on solid ground. They were loaded onto the transport ship, and the true horror began. If the hulk was a dungeon, this was a tomb. The space between decks was barely high enough to kneel. To kneel, they were chained in pairs, packed so tightly they slept in shifts, pressed against the sweating bodies of strangers. And then the ship began to move, down the Thames, out into the English Channel, and then south, into the vast, unforgiving ocean. The journey would take 8 months, my answer, if only he'd known what horrors were waiting for him across that vast, empty ocean. 8 months in near-total darkness, rocked by storms that threw them against the timbers until their bones ached. Scurvy took hold, their gums bleeding, their teeth loosening. Dysentery, the dreaded bloody flux, swept through the decks, killing men without ceremony. Their bodies were simply wrapped in a bit of old sailcloth and tossed overboard into the endless blue. Thomas survived. He and Lachlan looked out for each other, sharing stories, protecting what little food they had, and keeping each other sane through the long, terrifying nights when the ocean roared around them. He was no longer just a farmhand. He was being forged into something new, something tougher, by the relentless pressure of the voyage. After 252 days, a cry came from the lookout. "Land ahoy!" A frantic scrabbling followed as men, weak and emaciated, clawed their way to the grates for a glimpse, their first sight of Australia. It wasn't the paradise some had dreamed of. It was a long, monotonous line of coastline, a smudge of dull, alien green under a harsh, brilliant sky. This was Botany Bay. But Governor Phillip, the man in charge of this whole mad enterprise, soon realized it was no good. The soil was sandy, the water scarce, so the fleet moved a few kilometers north, sailing into a magnificent natural harbor, which he named Sydney Cove. This was it, the final destination. As Thomas was brought up on deck, the full, staggering reality of his new world hit him like a physical blow. The air was thick with a scent he'd never known, the sharp medicinal tang of eucalyptus. The noise was a chorus of strange bird calls, the screech of cockatoos, and the manic laugh of the kookaburra. The trees were twisted and unfamiliar, the light sharp and unforgiving. Forgiving. And there, on the shore, watching them, were the first people, the Era. They stood silent and watchful, their dark skin and lean bodies radiating an ancient connection to this place that the pale, sickly newcomers could never comprehend. The real work began. This wasn't a settlement. It was a camp on the edge of oblivion. The convicts, weak from the journey, were put to work. They had to clear the land, felling massive, iron-hard gum trees with blunt English axes that shattered on the foreign timber. They built rudimentary huts from cabbage tree palms and clay. Rations were meager and soon became perilously low. The colony teetered on the brink of starvation. For Thomas, a bloke transported for stealing food. The irony was cruel and absolute. Here he was, at the end of the world, starving all over again. Discipline was brutal. A stolen biscuit could earn you 100 lashes. The triangles were set up, and the sickening thud of the cat-o'-nine tails on a man's bare back became a regular sound in the settlement. It was a tough gig, designed to break the spirit, yet it didn't always work. A strange sense of community, a "we're all in this together" mentality began to grow amongst the convicts. They developed their own slang, their own way of looking at the world, a dark sense of humor to get them through the day. They were learning to be resourceful, learning to be Australian. 7 long years. Thomas served his sentence. He kept his head down, did the back-breaking work, and survived. He survived the hunger, the lashings, and the despair. One day he was called before an officer and handed a piece of paper. His ticket of leave. He was a free man. Well, an emancipist. Free, but still trapped 15,000 kilometers from home. There was no going back. England was a ghost, a half-forgotten memory. This strange, harsh land was now his reality. He was granted a small plot of land on the edge of the settlement, near Parramatta. The soil was stubborn, the work relentless, but fair dinkum, it was his. He wasn't alone. He met Eleanor, an Irish girl transported for stealing a bolt of cloth. She had the same haunted look in her eyes that he recognized in himself, but also a fire, a fierce determination to live. They married under a gum tree, a simple ceremony witnessed by Lachlan and a few other mates. Together, they worked their small plot of land. They failed more often than they succeeded. Crops withered, they battled drought and floods, but they never, ever gave up. They built a small, sturdy hut. They had children, and their children were different. They were born here. They were born free. They knew no other home. They were the first true Australians, with their father's quiet resilience and their mother's fighting spirit. Thomas never became a rich man. He never held a position of power. His name isn't in our history books. But his story, and the story of the thousands like him, is the true founding story of this country. It's a yarn that's been written into the very soil. They were the reject, the unwanted refuse of an empire sent here to be forgotten. But they weren't forgotten. They endured. They endured. They put down roots in the most inhospitable ground, and, against all odds, they grew. They transformed a brutal penal colony into a home, and that home into a nation. Their lives are a testament to the fact that history isn't just shaped by grand battles or powerful rulers. It's shaped by the quiet, stubborn resilience of ordinary people facing impossible odds. It's the legacy of the battler, the spirit of giving it a fair go, of picking yourself up after you've been knocked down, time and time and time and time again. So the next time you think about what it means to be Australian, remember Thomas. Remember the forgotten faces from those crowded, filthy ships. Their pain, their sweat, and their incredible, unyielding hope is the foundation on which everything else was built. Their story is our story.